Hey, my lovely scholars. Here is a help video for you if you're struggling to make your research question or you need some further clarification on what the IA is and what your overall end game expectations are going to be. In this video, I'm going to give another rundown of the IA, show you some sample IAs, mostly just to view the formatting, go over some rules, and then help you brainstorm some topics and potential research questions. So just a reminder of what we went over in class. The IA is the internal assessment, and for your science class, it's going to take the form of a full lab report or research paper that you're creating from beginning to end. It's graded on all parts of the study or the experiment, whatever you want to call it, beginning with your research question that you design and then carry out the investigation for. It's going to be graded based on these 5 criteria right here. And it's going to be worth a total of 20% of your IB grade. So this is a good way to start off with a strong score before you go into the IB tests. And so hopefully you don't have to stress as much about those if you can start off by getting your 20% from the IA. Okay, so first we're going to look at a couple of examples. Okay, so here is an example of an entire internal assessment, or IA. So we can see that it starts off with the research question and then moves into background information. So their research question is, how does tennis serve success differ between using a static stretching and dynamic stretching warm-up for female varsity tennis players? So really quick, just a couple of things. They have made it very clear who they're studying by saying the gender, the ability level, and the sport. They have not just said performance, they have said tennis serve success. So that's what they're measuring. That's going to be the dependent variable. How does that differ when you use static stretching or dynamic stretching? So stretching is the independent variable. Once they move into the background information, you start getting info about the independent variables, the stretching types, and how that could relate to tennis serve success. So it talks about warm-ups in general. Static stretching has different effects than dynamic. It defines a static stretch, defines a dynamic stretch. Then it talks about some benefits that are known about each. And then they continue on where they're citing some previous research here. So Macmillan was somebody who studied this, found that dynamic warm-up consisting of all of these things held a performance enhancement for an agility test. And then they found no significant difference when they had a static warm-up. And then again, some more background, all of this to help clarify the understanding for the reader and set up the purpose of this study. So they're acknowledging what we already know about this topic, and they're setting the stage for why we need to do this particular study to gain new unknown information or from a new perspective. Okay, the next little section is they state a hypothesis. So they said that the ones using the dynamic warm-up will have a higher number of successful serves out of 10 compared to using a static. Then they go in and they lay out very clearly independent variable, dependent variable, all of their constant or controlled variables and why it is important to control all of them. So these are things that y'all should be thinking about as you're coming up with your study. Are you going to be able to do a nice controlled study with appropriate methods? They had a lot of controlled variables in this, which is great because the more variables you're controlling, the better you are isolating the impact of your independent variables. So we're controlling all of this, keeping it all the same for all the participants in hopes that our results are a better reflection of just the type of warm-up that they did rather than being impacted by all of these things. Okay, then there were 2 things that they identified as confounding variables. Those are, I don't need to write it, they are out of our control, but we have to acknowledge the potential impacts they could have. I think they should have had a little bit more detail on some possible effects of these confounding variables. Okay, and then we move into the methods. They tell you all the materials that you would need to do this. They give us very clear pictures of their setup. Okay, so you got the static section up there, dynamic section right here. Sources are cited. Then we have a diagram of the core and how to assess the participants as they're doing their serves. Then a procedure from the very beginning, starting with consent form. Okay, and then they move into during the study, blah, blah, blah. Make sure you hold the exercises for this amount of time. Exactly how to measure. Keep track of blah, blah, blah. How to put that in your raw data, etc. All right, then you will have a raw data section. This is literally just all of the data you've collected without doing any calculations. So we're not calculating means or anything like that yet, just presenting the data. Notice how it's nice and organized, participant number with each day, so the trials and how many successful serves out of 10 were made. So very clear heading, clear labels within the table. Okay, then they gave us some qualitative data, which is more like things you're observing about their performance or about their mindset during it, or physical things like what they're wearing or if it looked like they were tired. So just things that will add to the analysis and evaluation of your data. So for example, participant 1 wasn't feeling well, and so maybe if we go and once we're analyzing all of our data, if we notice that participants 1's numbers are having a larger effect or they're acting like an outlier, kind of dragging down the results of our data, maybe we would use that justification to exclude participant 1 from the data, or at least to discuss the impact that those numbers had on the data. Okay, and we'll get into all of this later. I just wanted y'all to see a visual of the entire paper. You can pause and read as you need to. So here's where they get into the actual analysis. So a t-test is a statistical test to see if there is a significant difference between the static warm-up group and the dynamic warm-up group. So they're not going to look at that table of raw data and just eyeball it. They're doing an actual mathematical test and saying what the results of that test tell us. Then we have a conclusion, talking about the significance of their results. And then we evaluate, talking about some limitations of the study and some improvements that could have been made. And then we have lastly an extension. So based on what you learned in this study and what your results said, what could an extension or an addition to this study be? What could we go continue to research in the future to build upon what you discovered in this? Okay, and then we got our works cited, and that is it. So they hit exactly the 12-page limit. That, like I just said, that is the limit. So what y'all can do is, if your writing continues onto this page, works cited, raw data, etc., that can go on a page underneath 12, and it won't count as what's being graded. Again, we'll focus on that later. All right, I don't want this video to be a million years long, so I'm not going to go through the other two examples, but I'll post this document so that y'all can click on those examples and view them as needed. So let's get into some rules here. So we've already talked about this, but just reminders. Making sure your research question is very specific and focused. It can be 1 or 2 sentences. It can be phrased as a question or a statement, but either way, it's going to specifically state the objective or the goal of your investigation. So just by reading your question, I should know or have a very good idea of how you are setting up the methods for your experiment, what exactly you're measuring, what exactly you're trying to figure out. Again, just a big fat reminder, let me do this one in red. You are not allowed to do anything that involves ingesting any substance, even if it's just something as simple as like Gatorade. I know it seems harmless, but we don't have a full picture of everybody's prior health and health needs and risks, and we are not allowed to do stuff like that. So none of that. Okay, moving on. You should be able to use the scientific method in your experiment, or at least a general outline of it. So that's asking a question, developing a hypothesis, designing a way to test it, doing the test, reflecting on the results of that test, modifying your question or hypothesis as needed, etc. We want quantitative data, that is numbers, so things that you can measure: temperature, heart rate, blood pressure levels, amount of reps, distance, speed. You get the point. All of those things can be measured. Things that you're observing that would be qualitative, like they appeared confident, they seemed to have good energy and motivation, blah, blah, blah. But if that was the only thing that you were collecting for your data, you can't analyze that and you can't draw conclusions from it. So we want quantitative data that we're measuring, and we can support it with qualitative data. Your terminology in the question should be specific and relevant to your individual experiment. So the terminology there, if you're talking about football, rather than just saying agility, you would choose an agility drill that is used for football players. If I'm talking about dance, and I wouldn't say, I don't know. Hopefully you get the point. It just needs to be not vague. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. Okay, guys, it is cold and it is Monday and my brain's not really firing that well. Okay. We want to make sure we have one independent variable, one dependent variable. Depending on your study, the independent variable could need several variations. So let me give you an example of 3 variations. If you were studying the effects of cold water therapy or cold water immersion therapy on recovery, you would go do some research into the range of temperatures that they think might be the best for recovery. And within that range, so let me back up. If you had temperature as independent variable, then we could say we're doing it at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that way you could have, let's say like 10 participants per group. Each temperature group does 3 trials. That way you have a lot of data. Remember, the more data you have, the more participants or the more trials, the better the reliability of your data is going to be. So with this, we are getting a good comparison of temperatures within that range, because maybe if you can get the same performance enhancing results at 50 degrees Fahrenheit as you can get at 40, 50 is probably going to have less safety risks and risks of harm or hypothermia and things like that. So if you can get the same results by going into water, it's also going to be more comfortable by going into water that's 50 degrees Fahrenheit as opposed to 40. Obviously that's better, but you might find that the 40 degree one does have a significantly different impact on their recovery, making it the better option. So that's an example where you have variations. You could do more of a correlational study. So to what extent does grip strength affect what's not obvious? I shouldn't be making things up on the fly right now. I should not be allowed. Let me pause. Okay, got it. So if I was looking at gymnasts and how they perform in the high bars, I could say, to what extent does grip strength correlate with the number of falls during a practice session on bars? So I'm not manipulating or going in and intentionally changing anything. I'm just measuring their grip strength, and I'd be observing their practice and recording the number of falls. So that doesn't fall under a traditional independent variable when we think of that as like the variable that we're manipulating. Rather, we are just trying to find a relationship or an association between 2 variables. So we can call those like the predictor and the outcome variables, or just like observed variables. Okay, number 5, you don't want your question to be ambiguous in any way, so you don't want to say, how does hand grip strength assess performance on bars or correlate to performance on bars? I very specifically said the amount of falls during a practice of a set time. That is the way that I'm measuring performance. Performance is so broad. If your teacher told you or your coach told you, said, go perform, you would look at them crazy, because perform what? Perform it how? What do you want me to do? So performance, vague. Guys, go be fitness. Go do fitness. Hello? No. So don't, if I talk to you like that, you'd look at me crazy. So do not propose research questions like that to me, because I'm going to look at you crazy. Okay. And again, make sure you don't have a million variables. I didn't say, to what extent does hand grip strength, shoulder mobility, and abdominal endurance affect the amount of falls seen in a 30-minute bar practice for gymnasts? Hello? How are you going to assess all of that at the same time? And how are you going to see if it's the falls that have the impact, if it's the grip strength or the mobility or whatever? That's a lot, and they're not very related to each other. I would have a hard time justifying that I am isolating the effects of each thing. So, no. Okay. If you're doing anything that is like sports psychology related or mental health or anxiety or whatever, you might find yourself leaning towards surveys. Surveys are not prohibited, but you need to understand that in order to score well in your IA with survey type data, you would have to have a very, very large sample size. Very large. So they know y'all are high schoolers doing research, so they kind of make exceptions here where we're aiming for at least, 10 people per independent variable group. But if you have if you're doing a survey, you're not having to set up an entire experiment. A survey is very easy to distribute to a lot of people, so they expect you to do that. I'm talking like 50, 75, 100 people minimum. Okay, when you're doing your question, you don't want to look at a difference between males and females. You don't want to look at a difference between old people and young people, because we already know that the physiology and the anatomy and biochemical things that go on in their body are just already so different that they're going to have a very big impact on performance in some aspect. Kind of what I talked about, you don't want too much variation. Here's a good example. A bad question would be investigating environmental factors. Hello, there are a lot of things in your environment. This doesn't want to write. On physical performance. No. A good question, or a better question, what is the effect of humidity? So this is one environmental factor. On the physiological factors that indicate an athlete is working at a steady rate. So specifically just factors that indicate steady rate work. So that would be like heart rate, breathing rate, maybe blood pressure, or like amount of sweat produced. So they are measuring multiple things, but it's kind of like they're doing just like 3 studies in one, because they could very clearly see what the humidity level is or compare different levels of humidity and directly tie that to heart rate, directly tie it to breathing rate, etc. And then they can just analyze each individual factor separately and see which one humidity has a larger effect on. So because all of these are tied in by being something that indicates the steady state work, that is allowed to have multiple things that you're measuring, because they, again, all tie together. Okay, moving on. Okay, here is a fat list of topics. I'm not going to read all these, but I'm going to pretend I said that. You guys can go back on the document that I'm linking, so just read it on there. The only thing I will point out some of these are directly from the course guide. Some of these I just read the course guide and tried to come up with additional things that I know about that are related. It's not the end all be all. I'm not an expert in every single topic, so y'all can use these as like base points, and whatever is interesting to you, it's kind of your job to go become the expert on that thing, so you can design a question that is needed, that is not already known about the topic. All right, lastly, I want to look at a couple example questions. Obviously, I've given more than a couple on this document, but just so y'all can see kind of how wide our array of topics is and how many options you have and some different ways to word different questions. Okay. So some of these are pretty basic. You know, I wouldn't say that they are the most creative or optimal questions for your IA. Again, I'm just trying to give you all additional brainstorming pieces. So I just want to point out a couple things we see in these questions. Instead of just saying, I don't like this one, joint flexibility on throwing accuracy, this is much better. How to shoulder joint flexibility impact swimming speed in the freestyle. And I would even say measured by what? So how are they measuring shoulder joint flexibility? That should be included in their research question. And then we need the who are they testing? So when I say these are outlines, I mean it. These are not as specific as I want y'all to get. Okay, I like this one. How does nose breathing versus mouth breathing affect next day respiratory performance in running? Or how does mouth taping at night have an effect on respiratory performance? That's a big new trend right now. People are mouth taping, my husband included. I will say it does help with snoring, not gonna lie. What else we got? This is kind of cool. How does eccentric or concentric focus exercises affect vascularity and muscular pump after exercise? How does active recovery influence performance on consecutive sprint trials? How does mental imagery impact performance in free throws? Lung volume measurements using something easy like balloons. Yes, that is a thing. Again, you can go look these things up. Here, I love this example because it's got measurements. How does the grip strength in newtons of high school baseball pitchers, so we've got exactly who they are, what we're measuring, how does that affect the spin rate in revolutions per minute on a curveball? Very specific, very focused. We love. Yes, we love. Love, 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 love. Okay. You can't steal that question exactly. You cannot steal any of these questions exactly. Remember, all of y'all, all 200 and something of you from Lamar High School, have to have a different question. The quicker you propose and get your question approved, the quicker that question becomes yours, and you don't have to worry about somebody stealing the question that you wanted to do, but were too lazy to actually put it down on the proposal paper and send it to us. Be creative, be unique, write your own question. And I'm gonna leave you guys with this. If y'all have any questions, you can email me. It's maggie.welch@houstonisd.org. I'll go ahead and pause this real quick and write that down. You can email me. You can come see me in tutorials. Book an appointment with me because I don't want to be dealing with 50 kids at once, but we'll find a system and make this work to make sure y'all have the support that you need. Also, you can go see people in the writing lab. They're an excellent resource. We will be putting out something for extra credit here in a little bit. Yeah, that's it. Let me get my email up here real quick. Okay, so here's my info, email right there. Tutorials in 12A during lunch. You can book with me for after school. I'm usually in the lab or at my neighborhood desk. All right, good luck. Bye.